Ok, perdón.
¿Usted? ¿Cómo es usted hasta el YouTube? Sí. Okay. Sí.
Yo creo que no.
Serio, pegamos el video. Tiene que mandar a la chica. Can you do an introduction? You ready? More or less. Let's go time. ¿Tú lo vas a pasar? ¿Tú lo vas a pasar? Sí. No sé si apunte muy bien. Eso casi, ¿eh? No me importa, no. Un ratito. Sí, sí. ¿Estamos ya?
Hello, everybody. Okay, so Dr. Santana has a PhD in probability and statistics from Centro de Investigación en Matemáticas de Guanajuato. He's an associate professor at Escuela Nacional de Estudios Superiores from UNAM, Curitiba, for genomical sciences majors. His research interests are Bayesian inverse problems and mathematical and statistical modeling in infections. He's currently National Research Assistant Member Level 1. His experience includes uncertainty quantification for electrical impedance, demography, and inference of parameters for respiratory diseases, including COVID-19 epidemics. Let's begin with an applause and from.
Well, hi everyone. First, I want to thank Professor Hugo Flores for the invitation. This is the first time I'm here in the University of Arkansas. It's a very interesting experience just to get here. I came from the other side of the city, so that it was quite a bit. So the talk I want to give you today is not really technical. It's mostly I want to share with you some of the interesting applications of the statistics that I have been working since I was studying my PhD. So I hope you don't know all of them, because otherwise this talk will have no purpose. But let's see if we can learn something about it. So whenever you hear statistics, there are mostly three things that come to mind. Yes? So the first one is presidential election, right? This is probably the time when we most hear about statistics, you know? The other thing is probably sports. Okay? Every time you see a football game or basketball game or any sport you like, there is a ton of basic statistics, right? And the third time we hear about statistics is when we talk about demography, okay? The population census and things like that. Well, although these three areas, of course, use a lot of statistics, some of them very sophisticated, especially for electoral presidential elections, there are actually a lot of more applications that we are in contact with every day, and we usually don't know about. And that's what I want to talk about. Before we start, we need to know what is statistics. So the way I think about it is the area of mathematics that studies all aspects of data. Okay. When I say all aspects, I mean from the way we get data, the sampling process, the visualization, analysis, interpretation of data, visualization, inference, and of course, prediction, which is usually the most important task in the statistics. Well, since statistics works with data, then we need to know what is data. And you can think that it's just a collection of facts. These facts can be represented in a sort of way. Okay, for example, they are numbers typically, okay? Especially when we store that data in the computer. Okay, but they can also be text, images, video, sound, etc. Well, we live in the age of data. So the current technology, the technology we have allow us to gather a lot of information in very short time. Yourself are always gathering this information, okay? And because of that, we need to develop tools that allow us to work with that amount of data. Okay? So where else we can find the statistics besides the 3 examples I already gave you? Well, there are lots of applications in medicine, in politics, engineering, economy, social networks, artificial intelligence, etc. So before we go to these higher applications, I want to give you an idea of how we do statistical inference in a very simple example that I think you all are familiar with. So imagine one day you wake up and you feel off, okay? But you don't have any particular symptoms, you feel off, okay? Well, what you're going to do is you go to the hospital, okay? You see the doctor doesn't know what's the problem with you, okay? So he tells you to take some tests and check the results, okay? Well, it turns out one of the tests you took is positive for a very bad disease, okay? A disease you don't want to have. So, of course, you get alarmed and you ask the doctor, how sure are you that I really have this disease? Okay? The doctor will tell you something like this. This test will identify correctly 99 of every 100 individuals with the disease. Okay? And when the doctor tells you that, you think that it's time to make your testament. Okay? Well, it turns out that even with that number, that 99% chance seems very high, the probability that you have the disease is probably lower than you think. Okay? So let's analyze some data, some information regarding the test. So the probability that the test is positive, given that the person is ill, that the person has the disease, is 0.99. Okay? So this is what the doctor told me. Well, the truth is, this is only a characteristic of the test, okay? And depends, is conditional to the fact that you already have the disease. But the problem is you don't know whether you have the disease or not. You know that the test is positive, okay? Which is not the same. So the test has other 3 probabilities associated, okay? Which are these ones. The probability that the test is negative, given that you are ill, this will be an error for a test. So the probability is low. That's what we want, designing this test to have lower probabilities of error. Okay. The probability that the test is positive, given that you are not ill, this is also an error, and then the probability should be small. And at the end, we have the probability that the test is positive, given that you are not ill. This is correct, and then the probability must be high. Okay, these 2 probabilities here doesn't need to be the same that this probability. That's the information related to the test, to the procedure. Okay, but the problem is not exactly what we want. Okay, What we really want to know is what is the probability that you are ill, given that the test is positive. Okay. If you see, the order of these terms are in reverse. Okay. Well, so we can calculate that probability using theory or basic probability theory. Okay. Especially a result that is called Bayes theorem. Okay. I'm not going to show you the exact math. Okay. What important is the application of that theorem. So if you want to calculate this probability, we need one piece of information, okay, that is still missing. So we need to know what is the probability that you have this disease before you make the test. Okay. What is the prevalence of this disease in the population? If we are talking about dengue, for example, you know that dengue is not common in Querétaro, for example. Okay, it's common in Veracruz, in Chiapas, in other places, but not in Querétaro. So the probability that one of you have dengue, and imagine you have not traveled in the last few months, the last few days, okay, that probability should be low. Okay, so we are talking about, in this example, of a disease that only 1 of every 1,000 individuals has. Okay, so the probability of being ill a priori is 0.001. So we can combine this information with the fact that the test is positive to calculate the probability that we know. That's what the Bayes theorem does for us. Okay. So once we do calculations, we combine these two pieces of information, the test and the prior knowledge of the disease. It turns out that the probability that you are ill, sorry for the typo, the probability that you are ill, given that the test is positive, is only 0.09. It's very low. So what you are getting is most probably an error on the test than that you really have this. Okay. So this is how we do statistics to answer important questions. So we combine different sources of information. One source in this example is the test, okay? But the other that is very often really important is the prior knowledge that we have about a certain phenomenon. Okay. So okay, again, this is just a very simple example to give you an idea of how this works. Okay? And I think it's something that you probably have experienced sometimes. So you run a test and you think that you are ill because the test says so, but it turns out we need to consider other sources of information. Well, I know you're happy because you're happy. Okay. So let's start with some of the applications that probably you don't know or you are not familiar with. The first is called credit scoring. So when you go to the bank and you ask for a loan, okay, the bank will not give you just because you are asking. The bank needs to evaluate whether you have a good profile or a bad profile. And by good or bad profile, I mean that whether you are going to pay them or not. That's what they need to know. Okay? Well, it turns out that what the bank does is to create a score. And that score, if the score is high, they say, well, this is a good prospect. I can loan them money. Okay. And if the score is very low, then they will not give you credit. So the way it works is far more complicated than what I'm going to describe, but this is a very simple way. So what they want to know is what is the probability that you pay the credit given your characteristics. For example, your age, your income, your sex, where you live, and things like that. So they gather a lot of information, okay? And then they use that information in models, in mathematical models, statistical models, and they get the score, which is a resemblance of this probability. Okay? So if the probability is high, they give you the credit. If the probability is low, they don't give you. Okay? Well, there are some important questions when we work with credit scoring. For example, what means a high default probability? When the probability is high and when the probability is low. Okay, so you may think, well, maybe about 0.5, about 0.6, 0.7. Well, that's something we need to stop. It's not, we don't have an immediate answer for that. Okay. Well, how can I identify key features of each individual that will allow me to tell whether he will pay or not the credit? Okay. So as I mentioned that they will check, for example, your income, and it sounds important, right? And if your income is high, then the chances that you pay your loan are high also. Okay. Well, but what about other features? Okay. How do I identify those characteristics? And also, what is the weight of each feature? So even if income, for example, and maybe age are important in the model, maybe one of them is more important than the other. Okay, and that's something that also we need to find out. What are the statistical tools involved in credit scoring? Well, basically they are classifiers. Okay, so there are a lot of these tools in the literature. For example, we have logistic regression, which is probably the most common model. If you have taken some subclass, maybe some intermediate class, where you see something about machine learning or things like that, you probably have seen this sort of models. There are also decision trees, boosting neural networks, and deep learning, which is very famous right now. Okay, so I'm not pretending to explain. I don't pretend to explain all of this to you. It's just to give you an idea of the things or the tools that we use. Well, so in the case of the logistic regression, what it does is basically it approximates the probability of default, okay, given a certain number of characteristics of the individual. Probability goes like this. So for certain characteristics, probability of default is very low, and then it starts growing. Eventually, it becomes 4. Okay? So we need to create this sort of curve. Other example that is very common that I think you will be familiar with is recommendation system. So when you use your cell phone, for example, and you watch a movie or listen to a song on Spotify, the program will make you recommendation. Okay. But the question is how the program goes. What are the parameters to tell me that I will like a song from, I don't know, who is it? Michael Jackson? Or low, okay? So how does the program know that? Well, what the algorithms, the recommendation systems do is that they try to identify similar individuals. Okay, they will check the data that they have on you, and they will try to find which individuals are similar. In that way, if I'm similar with one of you, then the system will take the things that the other person has seen or listened, and they will recommend to the group. Okay, that's basically. What are the challenges when we deal with recommendation systems? Well, first, how do you measure similarity? Okay. What makes two individuals similar? Okay. How do you validate? Once you find groups, you propose a method and you say, okay, these are the groups that I think that are similar. Okay. How do you validate that? How can you be sure that these groups exist? Okay. Well, and the third thing that is very challenging from a technical point of view is how do I work with very sparse data? What does that mean? Well, imagine I have this matrix. Okay, this is for movies. This is my catalog. Okay, and I have individuals that are using my service, for example. Okay. So one of these guys saw this movie, Back to the Future, okay, and she liked the movie, so she gave me a thumbs up. Okay, this is for my database. This is just for one. Okay, So another person saw the same movie. Sorry, another person hasn't seen the movie, so I have 0. And there are individuals who doesn't like the movies. For example, Laura doesn't like Titanic, so I have a -1. Okay, this is the sort of data that Netflix has from us. Of course, they have a lot more, but this is just an example. Okay. Here there are a lot of 0, right? Because if you have, I don't know, 1,000 movies in your catalog, you will maybe see 10, 20, 50. Okay, that means that this matrix has a lot of 0s. Okay, and that is a problem. That's a challenge from a technical perspective. So, how do I work with this sort of matrix? Okay. Okay. So what are the statistical tools that we use for recommendation system? Well, we need some sort of clustering method. Okay. Clustering and classification are similar tools. Okay. The main difference is that in classification, you know that there are groups in your data. Okay. You just want to assign an individual to any of these existing groups. But in clustering, you don't know whether there are groups or not. So you are trying to find them. Okay. And clustering is more like an exploratory technique. Okay. And because of that, it's more challenging. Okay. There are several clustering methods. Here are a few. For example, Cummings is very common. You probably other parents to have taken some start class, maybe you have heard about it. There are the hierarchical clustering, Gaussian mixture models, and some other more sophisticated. Okay. Another application, food reliability. And this is similar for reliability in industry, okay, engineering, and other areas like that. So, how do you know when you need to remove food products from shelves in store? Okay. So you know that each product has how do you say that? I forgot.
Expiration date.
So you know that each product has an expiration date, okay? But products typically are removed before that date from shelf. And the reason for that is that you don't want to damage the image of the brand, okay? You don't want, the product will lose quality, okay, inside. So even if you can still consume it because it's chemically safe, the taste might have changed a lot and it can damage the brand, okay? So these products are removed from shelves a little before. Okay, so how do you determine that? Because this is important. If you do it too soon, then you are wasting your product. But if you are doing it too late, then you are damaging the image of the product. So you need to be careful with that. Okay. So what we want to know is what is the time when an individual in the population, in the target population, will reject this product. When the flavor changes or something, okay? This time, when they reject the product, is what we know as shelf life, okay? So in order to evaluate or to determine this shelf life at time, we need to gather a group of consumers. We give them samples of the product with different ages. Okay, so one is fresh, the other maybe has 1 or 2 weeks, the other maybe has 4 or 5 weeks, and something like that. So they will taste all the samples in a randomized order. Okay, and actually you don't tell them that you are that they are tasting a fresh product or an older product. Because that in your mind can change your decision. So then we ask whether they will consume that product or not. Okay, and what we get is an answer like 0 or 1. 0 if they reject the product, or 1 if they accept the product. Okay. Well, one of the issues with this is that we are working here with sensor data. Because what we want to know is what is the sign of the age of the product when they no longer want to consume it. But we don't know, observe that number exactly. We observe it in an interval with some uncertainty, okay? Because we don't gave them products continuously, we only gave them a few signs. Okay? So in statistics, that's what we call sensor data. Okay? And there are tools to work with that. So what are the challenges in this sort of problems? So first, we are working with longitudinal data. That means that your data is correlated. So if you have taken a basic stats course, they always tell you, I have a sample of size n, and the sample is independent. Okay, that's a very common assumption, and it's very important because independence makes calculations very easy. Okay, well, this type of data, because I got the responses of one individual in time. Okay, because it is the same individual, then this data is correlated. Okay, and we cannot work with that in the same way we usually do. Okay? So the other problem that comes with this type of data is inconsistency. So what you want is that the person that evaluates the product tells you, okay, I accept this, and this, and this, and this. Then eventually I reject, and once I reject, he should continue rejecting, right? What happens in reality is that he rejected here, but then accepted another project, and then he rejected again. So this is what we call inconsistency. We don't know whether this is an error, is 0 here, or the error is this one here. We just don't know. And then we need to deal with that. Okay, and then there are techniques to work with these sort of problems in data. Okay? Well, other problem is that when you work with humans, there is a lot of sources of variability. Okay, so you need to be very careful when you choose your sample, because you can have individuals with very different characteristics, and that may change your source. So that's also a very, very big problem. Okay? Any type of study that you do with live individuals, okay, whether they're persons or animals, it's always very challenging. Okay? So the other thing is that what we are asking the individual is that he gives us his perception about something. And perception is something very positive, right? And it can change from one day to the other, or it can depend on your mood or things like that. So again, this is very challenging because the type of data that we work with. What are the methodologies that we use here? Well, there is a general reliability theory in statistics, okay, that is used, for example, to determine failure times in electrical equipment and things like that. We are working with longitudinal data analysis, okay, again, because data is correlated, it's not independent. So this is typically work as we have stochastic processes. Okay. A stochastic process is basically something that involves typically in time. I think, sorry, that slide is in the wrong position. So the other thing that I have been working with a lot is something that we call inference in inverse programming. Okay? These are very interesting applications, but also very challenging from a technical point of view. So here, the objective is to estimate parameters of a mathematical model, okay, that typically involve differential equations. Okay? If you have taken some math courses, maybe you have heard about it. Okay? Well, This type of problems appears when we want to study something that we cannot directly observe. Okay. So to give you an idea of this sort of problems, we have computerized tomography. So in this sort of imaging techniques, what we want to analyze or to know is the composition of the body. Okay? We want to know what is going on inside a person or an animal. Okay? But of course, we cannot look into it, right? I mean, we cannot just open this person and see what's going on. Okay? It's not ethical and all that stuff. Okay? So what we do instead, okay, is design a process that allows to reconstruct this sort of image. Okay? I don't know if you have ever heard about how these things work, but the idea is that this machine sends energy beams, okay, from here, let's say, it goes through your body, and then a sensor in the other side will measure how much of the energy still got through. Okay? Well, we are going to do this process several times from different positions. Okay? And what we get, the data that we get here, is the energy that the sensors. Okay? The energy has, at least at first glance, has nothing to do with this thing, right? So how, using that data that is not what I want, is not the image, is something that is indirectly related, how using that data can I reconstruct it? So the idea is that I have a mathematical model. The mathematical model tells you, if you tell me what is the structure inside this body, I will tell you what you are going to measure when you send the beam. Okay? So the model tells you what you have to observe in the sensors, okay, if you know what is the structure. Okay? Well, the problem is that I don't know what is the structure. So what we're going to do is work in reverse. Okay? We are going to use the observed measurements, and we will try to find what is the image that generated the data to the model. So in a sense, it's like we want to invert this function or this mathematical model that tells us the relation between the data and what we want to know. Okay, that's why we call it inverse problem. Okay. So there is another type of tomography that is called electrical impedance tomography. It works more or less in a similar way. So here what I'm going to do is I have electrodes I put around the body, some area in the body of the person. I'm going to send electrical charges, for very small. Okay. And then the electrodes also measure how much of that current travels to the body. Okay. And then again, there is a mathematical model that relates the things that you measure and the structure of the body, and then eventually it can give you an image like that resembles what is going on inside your body. This type of tomography is used, for example, to diagnose problems in the lungs, okay, and things like that. So it's a very similar approach. What changes is basically the mathematical model. Well, the blue ring is also something that is an inverse problem. Okay, so imagine there is a real image here. Okay, it's a game image. Okay, but because when this is like reality. Okay, but when I take the photo with my camera, there is interference from light sources and things like that. So the image gets blurred. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to recover the original image using this blur version. Okay. So again, there is a mathematical model that tells you, well, if you tell me what is the original image, I will apply a transformation for each pixel. Okay. And I can produce several types of blurred images. Okay, so I want to work in reverse with that model. Okay, so if you have this thing, I want to recover the image that generated. Okay? And you can get something like this that is not the perfect image. Okay, but of course it's better than the one you have. This process is called the blurring. Things like that are similar to the filters that you have in the phones, Instagram, or the camera of your cell phone. Okay, these sort of techniques are used to create effects in the image. Sorry, I have to return to the slide. Sorry. Okay. Well, other applications of inverse problems appear in epidemiology. So we are now very familiarized with this thing of the COVID-19 disease. Okay. So when the outbreak started in China, mathematicians started to model the disease, the progression of the disease, trying to answer important questions such as whether the outbreak will go all around the world, or maybe it will be something contained in China. Okay. If when that outbreak will end, okay, what will be the magnitude of that outbreak and things like that. So there were a lot of questions that epidemiologists tried to answer, okay, at the time. So the way we model these things is using a thing that is called SIR model, or variance of this. SIR stands for susceptible infectious recovery. The idea is that at the start, the population is susceptible to the disease. Eventually, they will get infected, okay? And after a time, they will get recovered, okay? This model doesn't consider, for example, the fact that you can die from the disease, right? So this is a very basic model that we use when we analyze epidemics, okay? These are the equations, differential equations that describe the model. Again, you don't really need to pay attention to this, but it's more interesting to understand the dynamics, okay? So this blue curve tells us what is the behavior of susceptible individuals. Right? Susceptible individuals. Okay. The idea is that they will decrease because most of them will be getting infected, okay, which is the orange curve. Okay. And at the start, there is no one recovered from the disease because this is a new disease. Eventually, everyone will be recovered. Okay. This is the progression that we expect from an epidemic. Okay. Well, there are more sophisticated models than the one I showed you that consider, for example, here we have age structure. Okay, so the idea is that the disease doesn't work the same with kids that with adults that older individuals. Okay, so what we are going to do is we have a system of equations, okay, a dynamic for each of these groups, and these dynamics are connected. Okay. Also, for example, here we have initial dynamic for the population, and then because, for example, the interventions that the government made, we have to split the population in two groups. Those that follow the mitigation measures, for example, those that stay in home, those that use the face masks and things like that, and the other group that doesn't. Okay, the ones that don't care about it. So we can complicate these models as much as we want. Of course, the more complicated the model, the more difficult to work with. Okay. So what we try to do with these models is to predict what will happen with the disease. Okay. So for example, here we have the gray bars show the number of cases reported. I think this is Mexico City. Okay. And you see that there is dark gray bars and some pale gray bars. Okay. Well, the difference between these two colors is that to train our models, okay, we use only the dark bars. Okay. And using that information, we want to predict what will happen with this. Okay. So here we have three different models that we use, not exactly the one I showed you, but three models. And you can see that, for example, the orange one doesn't do a good job. Okay. The orange one says that the number of cases will just increase exponentially, and we don't know when it will end. So, for example, the data that we use to train the model ends in May. Okay, we project the data until January, next January. Okay, and you can see that the disease doesn't come slow. Okay, doesn't. The green one, you can see, I don't know if you can see, but there is a line here, a green line here. That is like the main prediction, let's say. Okay. And it more or less follows the behavior of the disease for the following months. It overestimates the number of cases, the observed number of cases, but in the general trend, it's more or less okay. The problem with this model is that it has a lot of variability. There are a lot of these bands, this green area tells you like possible scenarios for the evolution of the curve. Okay, so it has a lot of variability. A third model, the blue line here, is probably for this example the best one, because it follows the trend of the cases and it has low variability. So that's what we want, right? We need to predict what will happen in advance, several months in advance, okay? In order to take some decisions, right? For how long we will maintain the curfew, for example, or how long you need to wash your hands and use the face mask and things like that, right? Well, the problem with COVID-19 is that the disease didn't stay low, right? There were several outbreaks. And that has a lot of possible explanations, okay? One of them is that maybe at the start, the interventions that the government introduced were effective, okay? But eventually people just relaxed, okay? And didn't follow the instructions anymore, okay? That's one possibility. The other is, you know, all these variants of the virus that appeared. So the evolution of the virus is what is probably also what caused these outbreaks, etc. Okay. So the challenge here is to learn from what we saw in this epidemic as well as other, and try to use that information to prevent new ones. Okay, we need to evaluate which of the interventions were more effective, which were not, and things like that. So to work with these sort of problems, we need to know something that is called regularization, least squares, Bayesian inference, and these are some of the tools that we use, but of course there are other. So what I want to tell you is there are a lot of applications of statistics. Okay, actually, I think it will be difficult to find an area in our lives where statistics is not present. Okay, in one way or another, okay? Directly or indirectly. Okay? So one question that you can is always strong to me is really statistics relevant in the 21st century, given that we have a lot of data now, okay? A lot of data. And there is this idea that just the raw data can give us all the answers, okay? Well, it turns out that the raw data cannot do that. It doesn't matter how many data you collect, okay? Because some of that data is not really useful, okay? It's just noise. Okay, and you need to learn how to distinguish noise from real information. Okay. So we need to keep developing these tools to get better decisions, to get informed decisions, and of course, statistics is relevant. According to the US Bureau of Labor, it is expected that the rate of employment for mathematicians and statisticians or data scientists, okay, will increase around 30%, okay, from 2021 to 2030. Sorry, 2031 and 2029. Okay. And also, if you search, statistics is one of the best scientific careers that you can take. So I'm not telling you that all of you should be statisticians, okay? But you probably will eventually will work with this at some level. Okay? And it's important that you give it the importance that it's needed. Because one of the problems right now in science is that we cannot reproduce the results that are presented in papers. And we cannot do it because these statistical procedures haven't been taken into account. Okay? People is just forgetting that there must be some formality when you do this data analysis. Okay? So to get a degree to do statistics, well, not really. It helps, of course, if you have one, but it's not really necessary. I have a lot of colleagues that do very good statistics, and they are not statisticians. Okay? They are doctors, they are engineers, etc. Okay? The important thing that you need to consider is that if you are going to do statistics, you really need to be careful on what you do. You need to pay attention and you need to learn. Okay, statistics is not simple. Okay, it may seem because typically when you work with statistics, you are calculating average, okay, or the variance or the standard deviation. Okay, and that is a formula that everyone can calculate. Okay, but the problem is that people use that tool, those tools, without really knowing what they mean, what the standard deviation is, what the variance is. Okay, so you can, all of you are capable to do statistics, just do it responsibly. Okay. But, and one final thing, okay. In statistics, there are like ideologies, let's say, okay. So at some point when we take statistics classes, we are forced to choose one of these ideologies or one of these ideas. So one thing that you are probably faced is that you will be forced to choose between frequentist statistics or Bayesian statistics. Okay, maybe that tells you something, maybe don't. Okay, but if you get to that point, what I suggest you is that you be open-minded. Okay, none of these procedures is like the best. Okay. Each technique can be used in different situations, okay? So you should not be close to say, I'm just a frequentist or I'm just a Bayesian. This also works for parametric versus non-parametric, okay? Again, that may tell you something, maybe not, okay? But it's something that you need to choose when you do statistical analysis, okay? So again, don't close to one of these approaches. Consider the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. Okay? That is a little bit of advice. Okay? Well, so that's all. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
So, does anyone have a question?
So, thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you for coming. So she can.
Intermedia con el WhatsApp.
Son como cosas muy difíciles.
Hola,
Gracias.
Está bien interesante eso de los marcos.
Sí, tiene sus modelos.
Guys, if you want to say the other conference, you have to register again, please. Thank
Sí, tiene sus modelos. Yo tengo un amigo que trabaja ahí. Se encarga de cosas muy interesantes.